Hello everyone, and welcome to your ultimate guide to playing the Sicilian defense. This comes after white plays pawn to e4 and we play pawn to c5. This is black's best choice against pawn to e4 simply because, unlike a lot of other black openings, we are not sitting back and being passive and stupid, but we are pushing forward, we are counterattacking, and we are actually playing for the win. But this great opening does not come without great responsibility. There are a lot of lines to be known if you want to play this well, and so in this video I'm going to teach you everything. First, I'm going to cover the Najdorf Sicilian, which is the kind of main line, and then after that I'll show you all the little sidelines that white can also play. And no, I can't show you every single sideline because the video would be 30 hours long, but I have shown you the essentials. As usual, I have timestamps for each of the variations as well as a PGN in the description if you want to study this on your own in some analysis board, and let's get started. So, what is the actual point of playing c5 after e4? First off, we open up these squares for a queen, all of which are going to be quite useful in the future, but in the meantime, we're controlling the d4 square. So after white plays like knight to f3 here, like I said, I'll show the sidelines afterwards, we're going to go d6. Make a pawn chain and open up our bishop for future development, and white will strike in the center with d4 here, trying to make stuff happen, but we're simply going to capture. And this trade is good for us because we've opened up this c file, so in the future, this rook on a8 is going to slide over to c8, control all these juicy squares, at which point we're doing quite well. In the meantime though, we'll play knight to f6, attack white's e4 pawn, they'll defend knight to c3 here, and this is the main branching point of the Sicilian. You have 4 or 5 main lines you can choose from, but in this video, I've chosen to play the best of those, which is a6. This is the Najdorf variation, and unlike all the other variations, this is the least committing one. We're not really making any big moves we cannot take back, but we're essentially waiting for white to play their move and their setup and show us their hand. And it's also not completely useless on its own. It controls the b5 square, of which white is controlling a lot, so that is good to take care of, and in the future, we're likely going to play b5, and potentially even push up to b4 and really start annoying them. Before we start actually getting into the theory from this position, I want to show you one setup which you'll play in pretty much every single line and is very important. So I'll play like rook b1, rook a1 just to show you it. The setup I'm talking about is the Schwenningen setup, and you're going to play e6 to start that. Yes, you are blocking in both of your bishops now, but it really doesn't matter because you're going to strike in the center later on. You'll then play bishop to e7. Keep in mind, a lot of these moves are interchangeable. There's not like one set order. Most of the time, you can swap them around without much difference. This knight here is not going to go to c6, but instead to d7 here. Then this queen will drop onto c7, control these squares, and you'll then play the very important b5, which is the advantage of playing a6. This bishop here is going to go to b7 instead of going on this close diagonal here, and then you're going to castle. In a lot of lines though, you are going to delay castling because white does like to play h4 and g4 and h5 and g5 in a lot of these positions, so delaying castling is a nice way to make that plan a lot weaker. Then this rook here is going to go over to c8, once again, control the grip on all of these squares, and you then have such attacking ideas like moving this pawn up to b4, striking the center with either d5 or e5, and this setup you should know very well because you're going to play it in pretty much every single line. So keep that setup in mind, and let's start with the big variation of the Najdorf, that being the bishop to g5 one. This is the main variation, immediately putting pressure on our knight, and you're going to play the move e6 here. You can already see this is quite similar to the other position, and white's best move here is f4. This is the most challenging option. Their other option here that is decent is queen to d2, but it's just not as good. You can just follow through with the same plan here, bishop to e7, and then here, if you want to be aggressive, you can play an immediate b5, and when white long castles like this, you are pretty much always going to try and attack them. You'll then play moves like bishop to b7, knight b to d7. You can see this is very similar and basically the exact same as the setup I've shown. You can also push up to b e4 here if you want to be very annoying, and then d5. And this b4 and d5 setup is something that can happen in multiple positions. You're striking in the center, the b4 pawn is defended, and after like this trade, you can just take back with your knight. And now all of your pieces are working very well together, and the engine gives black the advantage here because even though your position is a little bit odd, white just does not really have any concrete way to actually stop us here. So because of that queen to d2 line is not very good. Instead, the better move is f4 here, and we have to be quite careful because white is going to push up either to e5 or to f5, and if we're not careful, that can be quite devastating. The move you want to play here is queen to b6. We're attacking the b2 pawn, and white does not have a very good way to defend here. Instead, their best move is queen to d2, and this is the poisoned pawn variation. I'll get more into this, but real quick, two little sidelines. White can try knight back to b3 to block this, but defending the pawn just isn't that challenging, and here we can now go to the same setup. We'll play bishop to e7, white can try like queen to f3, try something, there's not much here. Knight bd7, let's say long castles, and here, when white has long castle like this, you want to play the move b5, but you can't because your queen is still on b6, so you're just going to back up to c7. This move is, deceptively simple. We're now going to push up to b5 on the next move, potentially up to b4, really start harassing this knight, and after it drops back, then play like bishop to b7 here, and then after all this, now it's the time to castle. It looks like white may have some firepower, pointed towards us, but there really is not any actual attack here. We're then potentially going to push up to like a5 and a4, really start trying to attack white here, and we are doing quite well. Engine says we have equalized. Also, one other tricky line here is a3. You do have to be careful because if you snatch the pawn right up, then knight to a4 here, the queen is actually trapped. That is bad. Instead, just play bishop to e7, go in the same setup, and a3 just proves to be a waste of time. But like I said, white's main move here is queen to d2. And what we're going to do is we're just going to capture on b2. This is the poison pawn variation. So white is going to get a lot of compensation in return. However, we are up a pawn. So because of that, if we get the chance to equalize in an endgame, we do want to go for that as soon as possible. So that means all queen trade, piece trades, all of those are going to be good for us. So white here exclusively plays rook to b1, attack the queen. We'll move it over to a3 here, and this is the main branching point. White has free moves here. The most common one is e5, and despite being the most common, it's actually not that great, but you have to know the line. Captures, pawn captures, and now you don't move the knight away because then there's various queen and bishop tricks on the square. It gets very bad. Instead, you play h6. Counter attacking the bishop, let's say it backs up, you'll just play g5 here, counter attacking it again, and even though they can capture, and you captured their bishop, this looks quite bad, but in reality, white surprisingly has no way to, attack us here, actually get a concrete advantage. Let's say they develop now with bishop e2, we're going to play knight to d7. Attacking the pawn, white does not just want to give it up, they'll castle and protect it, and we have a very important rotation here, queen back to a5. The point of this is we're going to rotate it over to g5, and after like king to h1, let's say queen to g5, we are actually just going to try and start counterattacking white on the king side now and take advantage of the open g file. So after something like queen to d3, once again, if they trade, then we can just capture back. This queen trade is good for us. We're now in an endgame. We're just up a pawn. We have an advantage. They'll likely try to avoid that, queen to d3, and now we can play moves like knight to c5, harass the queen. It will move somewhere, likely to c4, and now we can just develop with bishop to d7. They cannot capture the pawn because it is defended, and if they try like bishop to f3 here to try and start hammering us home, then we have a very nice rook to c8. d8. And once again, and even though our position looks like it's totally crumbling, white has no way to attack us here, and our uncastled king is actually extremely safe, and we're doing very well here. Engine gives us about equal, or if anything, the advantage. This rook move over to g8, you'll try to start attacking on the king side, and you are doing quite well there. The other line here that is not quite as good is bishop takes on f6 immediately, seeing that after we take back, our pawn structure is quote-unquote ruined, but I mean, as you've already seen, we don't care about that and it doesn't matter. Let's say they now play bishop to e2. Here, the best move is to actually not go to d7, but instead knight to c6 here, because after this trade, we have a really funny looking pawn structure, but there's no way for white to break through. After like castles, we'll play bishop to e7, and it looks a little odd because we can't castle short because, that's there, and we can't castle alongside because that's there, but we actually just don't care. We're going to play the move queen to a5 here. We're once again going to try and go for that same rotation if white lets us. Let's say they now play f5 here. What you're going to do here is you're going to play h5. And once again, your plan here is going to try and just be delaying castling and try and get your queen over and actually start attacking white on their king side. After like captures, you can just capture back with your bishop. And even if they try like rook into b7 to try and, attack us, simply queen to g5. And there is nothing here. Then once again, they don't want to go for the trade. Let's say they try queen up to d3 instead. What you're going to do here is just the simple h4. You're just gonna try push up and keep attacking. And it looks ridiculous, but our king is incredibly solid. We are still up a pawn, and white has to deal with a counterattack on their king while they still cannot break through on our king. So once again there, we would have a slight advantage to equality, but their best line here is actually f5. Now we have to be quite careful here. I researched for a little bit, and what you're going to play here is the sideline b5. This is only like the fourth most common move, but it scores very well for black. And once again, we're sticking to those Najdorf ideas of playing b5 and potentially bishop to b7. White can try to capture here. We just recapture. There's not much. They can try to capture again. We just capture. It's not much. They can try to play bishop to e2 here, and then try to get this very annoying check, simply queen to c5. And once again, even though we only have our queen here, and we are up a pawn, it's kind of like a gambit, white has no way to break through. Now, they cannot play the check, because queen covers. Let's say they play knight back to b3, attack the queen. We simply play queen to g5. It's once again that same rotation. In this case, it's queen to c5 and then g5. Once again, if they trade here, then we can just take back, and we just have an advantage in this endgame, because even though they can give this check, king over to d8. We have no pieces developed, and yet we are up a pawn and we have an advantage because white just doesn't have a way to break through after like castles. Knight to c6 here, we can just keep on developing, and yeah, we have an advantage because white does not have a way to break through, and once again, we have a slight advantage here to equality, and you are doing very well in this endgame, despite how it looks odd on the surface. So, that is how to play against the main move of bishop to g5 and all of those variations, but let's start looking at some other ones. Their other most common line here is bishop to e3. This is the English attack, playing to play queen to d2, long castles, f3, and that can get quite annoying. So the kryptonite here is the move knight to g4. Attacking white's bishop, and they really just cannot go through with their plan here. If they try queen to d2, then we can simply just capture. And this trade is just good for us because we've gotten rid of our decent knight for white's very good bishop. So after something like e6 here, we can just go for the same Schweningen setup, knight to d7, b5, bishop b7, all the normal stuff, and we are doing quite well here. Another sideline they can try is bishop back to c1 here, and they have two options. You can drop back to c6 here. If you want a draw, this is literally just a direct transposition into the position we had just a few moments ago, but if you do want to play for the advantage after knight to g5, and bishop back to c1, you can try the move knight to c6 here. If they trade, we just capture back. This is good for us. We open up our B file. If they don't, if they instead play like f3 to try and attack our knight, one nice line here is queen to b6. We're now attacking their knight in the center. They cannot take because checkmate. And if they take on here, then we simply take on d4. We're once again doing very well here. So their best line is like h3, and after simply knight drops back to f6, this is equal to a slight advantage for us, and we are doing quite well. We don't really have any problems in our position. But white's best try here for an advantage is bishop to g5, trying to get some pinny business here. And what you're going to do is you're going to have none of that. You're going to play h6. Attack their bishop, and the point here is that after they back up, we play g5. We do not care at all, because after bishop drops back to g3, simply bishop to g7. And even though this looks very odd, once again, the typical thing in the Najdorf, white does not have a way to actually get a concrete advantage. Let's say they try f3 here. This is a nice little trap. Attack the knight. We actually have knight into e3 here. The point is, after queen d2, we have bishop takes on d4, and we basically win a piece. White cannot capture because the knight takes on c2 and they get forked. So that is a nice little thing to keep in mind. If they try instead h3 here to attack our knight, we simply drop it back into the center with e5. There's really not much for them here. They can try like bishop to e2 now, and now a nice knight b2 c6. If they capture, we can just capture back with the pawn. Once again, we get this nice open b file, and we are actually doing quite well here. Our queen will likely go to b6. This knight can likely drop back to g6, and we are doing quite well here. Their best try here, back here, is bishop to e2. Attack our knight. The move you want to note here is to not back up immediately to e5, but instead h5. Defending the knight. If they capture, I mean, we can simply just capture back here. We are doing quite well. We attack their queen. If they try h3 to attack our knight, we can actually get an advantage here after h4, because the point of this counterattack is that after they capture, we can capture, and this trade here, even though the end white is up one pawn, they have an absolutely disgusting pawn structure. I want to throw up just looking at this. Get this off of my screen. Instead, their best try is h4 here to try and attack our g-pawn, and what we're going to do here is we're simply going to capture, bishop captures, and now we just develop with the typical knight to c6 here. Now their knight in the center is attacked. Once again, if they trade, they can just capture back. We get the open b file. So the best try is knight back to b3. In here, we now play the best developing moves here, which are bishop to e6. Our king side looks like a total mess, but once again, they have no way to break through. After like f3 here, the knight can drop over to e5. Let's say queen d2, simply rook to c8. And after long castles here, we can actually try to start attacking on the queen side with knight over to a5. And even though we have not castles here, our king is completely safe in the center. This bishop is soon going to open up, and white actually has to deal with a lot of firepower potentially coming over and ruining their entire position. You can see pretty much every single piece we have here is pointing at the queen side, and even though the engine gives white as about equal here, they're gonna have to play a move like queen to e1 as their best move, which is like, nobody's gonna play that. And most likely here, white is going to get mauled in a vicious attack. So that is how to combat the English variation with bishop to e3 back here. And other than those two lines, there's actually not too much more to the Najdorf. I know I've gone through a lot, but in reality, there's not too much more. If they try, let's say bishop to c4, this is the Lipnitsky attack. It's not horrible because it does develop a piece, but f7 is not really an attacked square here, and in this variation, we can just follow the same setup. e6, then bishop to e7, and then a nice move here, b5 immediately to get some tempo on the bishop, and then simply castles here. Yeah, white just does really not have too much in this position. Let's say they try a3 here to try and prevent b4. We now play bishop to b7. And once again, this is a pretty standard line. Let's say rook over to e1. We now play knight b2 d7 here. Just a note, if they try like bishop takes on e6, and they do get this fork, but it doesn't really matter because after queen to b6, and this trade here, we have lost a rook and 2 pawns for white's knight and bishop, which is actually just an advantage for us because our pieces are going to be very, very powerful. Most people instead try, let's say, pawn to f3 here, just, a normal move, and after like rook to c8, we'll then play queen to c7, and yes, a pretty standard line, not too much to know here, and you are already doing quite well with a slight advantage. Let's look at another line here. Let's look at bishop to e2. It is just a normal developing move. This is the Opočenský Variation. That's probably not how you say it, but it doesn't really matter. The point here is if they do know what they're doing after e6, bishop to e7, let's say bishop to e3 castles, pretty standard here. If they know what they're doing, they'll play f4, which is a challenging try. If they just play like queen up to d2, this is not good for them. We'll play b5, the typical setup, and after like f3, knight b to d7, we're just doing very well here, and white does not have very good development. But f4, we do have to be a little careful, because if we just play like b5 here, the point of this is this bishop is going to go to f3, they'll push up to e5, the bishop will go to f3, our rook will be attacked, and this actually can get quite annoying for us. So instead, the move you would want to play here is just queen to c7 and actually delay b5 for later. And after like bishop to f3 here, we can play knight to c6 and try to block out their bishop from diagonal. Let's say king over to h1. We can actually trade in the center here and then play e5. And this is another very important strike in the center, and at first glance, it doesn't look very good. If they trade, we can capture back. We're doing quite well here. Our bishops are open. We are doing quite well. But if they just back up, we can actually capture an f4, because even though this looks quite bad, it looks like we're getting kind of mauled here. After bishop to e6, the point is we're not actually doing that bad, because even though we have this weak pawn, it just doesn't really matter. White can try like knight to d5 here, and after this trade, they can glue our pawn in place, but we have a nice knight to d7. Now this bishop here is going to go to f6, get on this long diagonal. This knight can rotate either to e5 or to c5, and you can see we're actually doing very well in that position. So that's how to play against the bishop to e2 line. Two more little sidelines before we move on. Let's say they try bishop to d3 here. This is a pretty common move, but it is not very good, and we can once again follow in the same footsteps. Let's say e6, castles, bishop e7. f4 here, it's not as powerful in the other line because the bishop is not going to go to f3, and so we can follow the same plan. Let's say knight b to d7, they'll play like a bishop to e3 here. If they try f5 and try to start attacking our pawn center here, we actually have a very nice move, queen to b6, and white is actually losing here. So this is a nice little trap. The knight is pinned here. If they try bishop to e3 to defend, then a simple e5, and yeah, they cannot deal with the pin here, and their knight is lost. So that's a nice little trap. But let's say they play bishop to e3 here. After like queen to c7, let's say queen f3. Now we can go b5 here. There's not really any pawn up tactics, because then we'll just play like bishop to b7 and their queen will be attacked. So instead, after something like a3, bishop to b7, let's say rook over to a1, now we can play rook over to c8, and yeah, there's really not much here. White can try queen g3 and try to start attacking us, just castle. Something to know about the Najdorf is that if it looks like you can't, castle because you're going to be attacked, just do it anyways. And white does not really have a way to attack us here, and we just have a small advantage because of that. And now the final line, this is a bit of a tricky one. It is the move pawn to f3 here. Now what they're doing is they're trying to get an English attack by preventing the move knight to g4 first, and if they do play this, the move you want to do is after like e6 and bishop to e3, don't allow them to play normally, play b5 and try to immediately start attacking them before they can even castle. Let's say queen to d2 here, bishop to b7, long castles, and now knight b2 d7, and because we've seen white long castles so early, we're immediately going to try and start attacking them. Let's say they try g4 here, try to push up to g5, attack the knight. We don't care because we'll play knight to b6 here. If they push up to attack, this is a waste of time. Knight drops back to d7. Now the two knights are going to have a lot of fun in the center here. Let's say they try h4, we can push up to b4. Once again, attack the knight, it will drop back to b1, and now we have the very nice and typical d5. Now the pawn is defended, we're striking in the center for bishop and knight, and we are doing quite well there. If they instead try, let's say h4, try to delay g5, not do it right away, we'll just go with the same plan. b4, knight drops back, now d5, it's the exact same thing. All our pieces are doing quite well here. Let's say they push up to e5, try to attack our knight, we just drop back to d7. Attack their pawn. If they try f4 here, to try and defend their center, this is a good example of why we don't castle right away, because we would be walking right into all this, which could get quite bad here, but instead we delay castling, we just play knight to c4, and we're going to continue our plans on the queen side. Let's say they capture, we can just capture back, and now white has to deal with a clumped king with a ton of just badly placed pieces all around. We're going to move the rook over, the queen over, the bishop can potentially get in, and they have to deal with two pawns potentially free, wrecking their entire queenside. Alright, so that's how to play the Najdorf Sicilian. I know that was a lot, but if you had watched all that, you should see a lot of similar themes that should tell you how to play in most of those positions, but now let's start getting into a lot of the juicy sidelines. They can try knight to c3 here, control the d5 square, and can protect their e4 pawn right away. This is the closed Sicilian. It's not, horrible, but it's not that great either, and we can play it pretty much the same way here. We'll play d6. If they go like knight to f3 here, then after knight to f6 and d4, and this trade, this actually transposes into the Najdorf Sicilian. We can play a6 here, transposes. There are a lot of those little transpositions, so keep those in mind. But if they do know what they're doing, they'll play f4 here. This is the Grand Prix variation, at which point we do have to be a little careful, but you can play this in Najdorf style with a6. And if white wants to not lose immediately, they have to play in a very weird way. Let's say they now play knight to f3, will develop knight to f6 here. If they try bishop to c4, which is very typical in the Grand Prix, this just does not work at all because we have b5 now, which is the advantage of playing a6. Their bishop is attacked. They cannot back it up because c4, the bishop is trapped, they are losing, so they will likely have to go to d5 here, but this trade is just not good. We'll then play e6, attack their knight, they'll back up, we'll go bishop to b7, and we are just doing very well here. We have a big space advantage on the queen side. We are doing quite well. If they try a4 to try and prevent that, this is also just not that good because it's kind of a waste of time, and we'll just go e6 here. And the point is, if they just try to develop, once again, if bishop to c4 is supernatural, we play d5, striking in the center, and pretty much all the variations from here just favor us. If they trade, we can just capture back, their bishop is attacked, they have to back it up, and after like knight to c6 here, we're just doing very well. Let's say they castle, we play bishop to e7, we're going to castle as well, play bishop to e6, we have a large space advantage in the center, and we are doing very well. So instead, their only way to survive here would be to develop with like bishop to e2, but that is just very atypical in the Grand Prix, and even if they do play that, we're still going to have a very good and solid position. Let's look at another sideline. Let's look at c3. This is the Alapin variation. They're trying to strike in the center with d4 here, and that can get very bad, so you want to prevent that with knight to f6 here. Immediately attacking their pawn. They only have one move here, which is e5 to attack us, and now we're simply going to move to the d5 square, because after d4 captures and captures, they can also play knight to f3 first. We cannot capture because then this, but this will just transpose into the other line. We're simply going to play the move after they capture back, simply d6 here, immediately trying to chip away at their center. If they play like knight to f3 here, I'll get more into this. If they capture, we can actually just play e6 here, and now our bishop is going to come and capture this, and after like knight to c3, castles, we have achieved equality here. White has lost all their advantage, and we are doing quite well. But if they do play knight to f3 here, the move you want to know is to play knight to c6, bishop to c4 here. This is a very common line. Knight is attacked, knight drops back to b6 here, bishop to b5, captures, knight captures, and now bishop to d7, undoing the pin. And yeah, white really does not have any advantage here after like captures. Let's say queen captures, they can try to castle, but we'll simply go e6. We'll play like bishop d6 or bishop b7, we'll castle, and yeah, we don't really have any problems here, and white has lost all of their advantage. And very similarly to the Alapin variation, if they play a pawn to d4 here, this is the Smith-Morra Gambit. I actually play the Smith-Morra myself, and after captures and like c3, if you take this pawn, this gets really, really dangerous. I do not recommend this at all. Simply play knight to f6 here. Attack the pawn, and after e5, knight to d5, let's say knight to f3 here, you'll just play knight to c6, captures, and now d6, and this transposes right back into the Alapin. A direct transposition, and I would recommend that because Smith-Morra Gambit can get really dangerous. I really do not recommend playing that. Let's look at a more beginner-friendly line, let's say bishop to c4. This is not a great move. The point here is that even though it does develop a piece, that f7 square is not really under threat, and we're going to go e6 and a6, and we can attack the bishop in various ways. We're going to start with a6 here, very good sideline to try and go b5 and attack the bishop. Let's say they play knight to f3, we'll first go e6 to control the d5 square. If they try a4 to try and prevent us from pushing up, then we actually just go the other way, d5. Attack the bishop, and we get a similar position to the Grand Prix after like captures. Let's say they back up to e2 here, we'll then just play bishop to e6, and normal development will commence, knight f6, knight c6, bishop b7, castles. We really have no problems there, we have a slight advantage. If they do castle and not really care about that, then we're simply going to go d5 once again. Attack the bishop, there is no check or any annoying lines like that. Let's say they capture, we can recapture, they can give one puny little check, it doesn't matter at all. There's no check here. After bishop b7, like bishop drops back to f1, knight to f6, there's really nothing here. We'll castle, and we can just, develop normally, and we really have no problems in our position. So because of that, bishop to c4 is not a very strong option either. Alright, two more other sidelines. If they try b4, this is the wing gambit. It can be a little dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, but you only really need to know one line here, which is to capture. They now play a3. You don't want to capture once again, because after bishop takes, we actually give them the point of their openings. Bishop is quite annoying. Instead, you'll strike in the center with d5 here. Attack their pawn, they're basically forced to capture. We recapture. One little trap, they cannot capture the pawn on b4 because then queen to e5 check. They get forked. That is definitely not good. Bishop blocks, queen takes, you're just completely winning there. Instead, knight to f3 is a better move, and here the best try for an advantage is e5. Now the bishop defends pawn, so if they capture, you can just recapture right back. You're still up a pawn. You have a nice grasp in the center. White cannot play knight to c3 here and attack the queen because you can just, capture that right up. So instead, their best try here is c3. To try and attack our bishop and then play d4, but we simply play bishop drops back to e7, and after like d4 here, you can simply trade and then play knight to f6, promptly castle. You really have no problems in your position, and you are cleanly up a pawn. Now, let's get into the final sideline here, which is actually the delayed Alapin. That comes after knight to f3, pawn to d6, and now c3 in this position. It is different than the other one because after knight to f6 here attacking, white has the option of playing bishop to e2. Now, definitely do not take the pawn, because then queen to a4 check here, and you get forked, and you also cry, which is not very good. Instead, just play the move e6 here, and you don't really have that many problems in your position. White is going to strike in the center with d4 sooner or later, like knight c6, let's say queen to c2 now, bishop e7, and now d4. But it's not really that good because their pieces are still quite closed in, and you don't want to capture here, just play castles. And you'll then go like bishop to d7, rook to c8, get your pieces onto the c file, which will open up soon enough, and you really have no problems here, and you are doing quite well. Alright, wow, that was how to play the Sicilian defense, a complete and ultimate guide. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I put a lot of effort into it. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time.